Hi, I'm Jonathan Louderback for the Loudest Crow, and
I'm Justin Kroh, and we're here to caw through the noise. You got the order wrong
I know I did. I
again.
told you as soon as you press record, I literally can't control what comes out of my mouth.
You cannot,
No, I'm not even kidding you. I literally went into that with I was going to do it right. I'm like, I do it, blank
you,
space.
you kind of just gaslit your future self almost.
I think so. I've noticed that whenever it becomes public speaking, like I instantaneously just become a different person. I feel like something takes over my body, and I am just a flesh suit that some sort of spirit is talking out of.
You
You know?
are a very good public speaker, though. I'll give you that. Like, I was watching over our last episode, and I remember some comments that some of our teachers have made in the past. You were very well spoken,
Thank you.
and that was one of the things that led me to wanting to start this podcast with you, because I was like, a well-spoken guy who talks about things I care about, and hopefully I talk about things he cares about. And I'm like,
Of course not. I'm just joking.
yeah. And so no, I was just I was laying awake at night, and I was like, John Louderback is so fun to talk to. Let's do something
Well,
with that.
it really it's whenever you're a grown up, you have to kind of give yourself excuses to do the things you want to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, and it's like we want to have real conversations, so it's like making it into a podcast. It may never take off, but we'll get to talk.
we'll get to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's really why I think this is why I look at this idea and think it's so cool, because it's an excuse for us to get together and talk regularly and
Yeah.
have these real authentic discussions, regardless of what kind of things happen extrinsically, right?
Yeah. And if anything, it's going to be like it's kind of like a journal in the sense that, like I have a few journals over there that I've written in intermittently throughout the years. I never filled one up. I've gotten pretty darn close. And you look back, and it's really fascinating if even by day to see where you were emotionally and to see where you were mentally. Like I remember looking back at some of the stuff I wrote freshman year of high school, and it's like you get to a point where the stuff you wrote, the stuff you said, it feels like an entirely different person. So this is going to be that. It's going to be 10, 15 years from now. And wherever we are in our lives, we may catch a look at this or whatever it is, or somebody will show it to us and we'll be like, who the fuck is that?
It's incredible that you say this, because I had the exact same train of thought. I'm reminded of something. I tried to start doing this senior year of high school. I tried to say, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write
Yeah, I remember you telling me. I read that, yeah.
yeah, an autobiography. So I'm going to write like the author's note now, and then each year I have that year to write a chapter, and then I can't go back to it. It's done. So grammatical errors, nope. Writing style, nope. I can't clean it up. It has to be what it is. Of course, I was smart, and I did that on my SPS account, which has now been deleted. So
Oh, did you lose it?
I did. I lost it.
Ah, it sucks. Well, because I know I spend a lot of time backing everything up.
I did not.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, there's nothing important on there, because I assumed that I had been writing this on my personal account. And I had not.
Yeah,
So
that does suck.
So it stinks, but honestly, I think this is a good way to kind of compensate for that, because I think having a visual, right, to go with
No, yeah,
to go with
100%.
it is so cool. So I'm glad. I'm also
It's
really
like
glad
it's
it's a
like
visual.
it's like those time lapses, where it's like one picture every day for however long. I love those,
Those are
and
so fascinating, and I'm like,
and they make me feel weird. You know what I mean?
whenever I see those, I want to ask. I always ask myself, what inspired them to start this?
It's one of those things too that's it's not easy per se, especially editing to get together. Jesus Christ, but it definitely feels like it's an easy habit to have while you're doing it. And then I feel like habits build upon themselves in a certain way. It's like I've heard before that once you start doing something for 30 days, it's a habit. Like it'll stick. And the reason is less because it's like sunken cost fallacy helps us in a way sometimes. It's like, oh well, fuck, I've already been doing this for a month. I might as well
do it
might
more.
as well keep going.
Exact
You
same
know?
thing with both Enter the Backrooms and my weird YouTube series on my main channel. Well, I shouldn't say my personal channel, about torturing PewDiePie's pets.
Yeah.
Right. For a while, it was kind of hard for me to remember to do it. Oh wait, that's right. I got this dumb series. I got to uphold.
Yeah, but then like episode 1,000, right? Like it was.
It got up to
ridiculous.
863.
Yeah,
so
which
almost.
is crazy, dude.
And yeah, no. Once I was about a month in, it was like, this is just a thing I do now. And every night before I went to bed, I'd do my little checklist, and doing an episode of that got added to the checklist.
Mhm.
And what was so fascinating was when I was done with it, because this was a thing where it wasn't just I keep doing it over and over for however long I want. It had a set endpoint. And so once that endpoint came and went, I was just sitting there every night thinking, oh, I gotta do my. No, I don't have to do that episode. I don't have to record anything tonight. So that habit lingered in my mind, and it still does. Every now and then I'll catch myself thinking, I gotta record an episode of this. And so it's one of those weird things that never quite goes away.
2 years, 2 years and change straight.
Yeah.
That's not nothing.
It is not nothing.
You know, that's like, my nephew is 3 years old. Your series was like as old as some humans are right now, dude.
Well, in like Enter the Backrooms, for example, as I was developing that, it was a similar situation where in October of this year, or last year, I guess, I released my final update. And then every night since then, I've been like, okay, when am I going to work on Enter the Backrooms? When am I going to work on my game?
Itch. Yeah.
I have that itch. But now with college actually helps. Staying productive helps because it kind of replaces those old habits with new ones.
You know, it's fascinating to me because this is actually a topic that I've been wanting to discuss as well. Something I was thinking about recently. It's like, I think, I'm not sure if it's societal or how much of it's personal or philosophical, but I definitely feel, and I think many people feel, I know you feel, this desire to be productive. This desire to use what we've been given, whatever it might be, to do something with it. It's like almost responsibility. And I guess it's like, you know, but you and me, by societal definitions, are doing everything right. Right?
Yeah.
We're going to college, we get good grades. I would say you work, but you basically do what effectively is working. You know, I'm working myself. And that's that. Like, most people, if they looked at us, and I have people at work that I work with who will tell me, yeah, you're doing it right. It's like, it doesn't feel that way sometimes.
It really doesn't.
You know, it's like, what the fuck are we doing wrong? It's like, what more can I do? And you break it down, it's like you have all these desires and you have this ideal sense of self. It's like, I want to be a pianist. I want to speak 5 languages. I want to, you know, read all these philosophy books. And it's like, you feel bad whenever you don't do them, but you wouldn't ask somebody else to do it. So I guess my question is, for you to answer however you want, is how much of what you do day to day should be like, how much of your personal, let me rephrase the question, how much of your personal potential are you obligated, responsible for fulfilling?
So one thing that you said that I think describes my state of mind about this stuff perfectly is, what more can I do?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very powerful sentence that's constantly pinging in my head. Because I, like, take my game, for example. I worked thousands of hours on that.
Yeah.
And so I had that out there, and I was like, great, I'm so fulfilled. I did this cool thing. Now what? Okay, now I'm going to update it. Okay, update it. Now what? Oh, I guess I'll update it more. Now I guess I'll advertise it on YouTube and try to distribute it. Now I'll add more languages so people in other places can play it. And that now what kept just coming after me. It was just like this relentless kind of hunt for me. And what's interesting is, really quick side tangent, the Bible actually kind of mentions that. And mentions that, you know, God is kind of the basis of the human drive to constantly achieve and do more, which I think is very interesting. But coming back down to earth, I think for me anyway, that question, you know, what more can I do, becomes so much more prevalent when competition is involved and when you start comparing yourself to others, which is why it's such a dangerous thing. Because talk to most like therapists nowadays, if you start comparing yourself to others, it's like, hey, stop that. That's not healthy. That's toxic. And it's really true, because, you know, I released my game in 2021. Over a year later, the Backrooms exploded in popularity, and a ton of games doing what my game did, but with, like, say, a more professional development environment or better looking models or animations. Like, a ton of them started doing this thing. And because they used more professional environments, and because these projects were newer, they spent less time working on these things. And yet so many of them have had much larger returns than mine. And so grappling with that, while grappling with what more can I do, is so hard. Because once you start throwing comparisons into the equations, then it's not, oh, I'm here right now, how can I further myself? It's, oh, I'm here, this person's there, how do I get to there?
Yeah, but you know, I guess my question too is, because you're right, comparison is the root of envy, and, you know, I've heard that comparison is like the root of evil sometimes. And it is bad for you by and large, and especially if you're a competitive driven person, it will oftentimes lead to less success than if you had just been personally driven. But I guess my question too is, like the root of my question is more than like why is it bad? Are you responsible to fulfill what you would say is your personal potential? And to put that into words to make it a bit more clear, say there is somebody works a 9 to 5 job at McDonald's, like you've worked at. They work 9 to 5 job at McDonald's. They pay their rent. They pay for their food. They don't have any relationships, and they play video games all day, right? Is that person justified in doing what they're doing? Because the logical part of my mind, you know, I would say yes.
I would also say yes.
But there is a part of me that's like, yeah, sure, they're doing right, but I wouldn't want to be there. You know what I mean? And what, like, I guess I'm not sure quite, like, I'm just trying to talk about that and, like, why is it that we hold that hypocritical notion about ourselves?
Well, kind of tying into what I said earlier, we definitely seem to have this either innate or God-given drive to be more, to do more.
Yeah.
And that definitely kind of plays a role in this, because take this guy who's working at McDonald's. I would say, or I would argue that if he's doing this and he's okay with it, he is more self-fulfilled than someone who's breaking their back every day to like, you know, become the CEO of a company or to invent a cure for cancer or do something like that, because they have looked at their situation in life. They have given themselves a definition of satisfaction, and they are actively
pursuing
that definition of satisfaction.
I guess that's what it is. It's not a question of like amorphous personal potential, but more like, are people capable of setting those definitions? And the answer is yes, but it's like, how do we set those definitions of success for ourselves? And how, like, what is a reasonable degree by which we could set those definitions? You know, it's like, we tell kids you can be whatever you want to be, but that really isn't true.
It's not.
You know, and as insofar that I do, because I found myself recently, I was in history class, and I can already tell my history professor is a bit more of a conservative-minded fellow. He's like, the American spirit, hard work pays off, that sort of stuff. And, you know, and with my view of history, with my view of socioeconomics and stuff, I'm like, you know, that's not true. A lot of these people have these advantages, whatever. But I stopped and thought about it. I'm like, do I believe that hard work just doesn't get you where you want to be? And I really started thinking about the implications of that for my own personal, you know, actions, for my own actions. It's like, if I don't believe that hard work can get you to where you want to be, what's the point in working? And while I do work, I do things, it's like I realized, how much of the root is that? It's like, if people start believing that hard work can't get them anywhere, are they going to allow that to define what their personal expectations and potential are? And is it a bad thing if they set modest expectations for their potential?
So it's interesting that you had a conversation with your professor, or at least he mentioned something like this, because in a similar vein, my philosophy professor, of all people, we have a philosophy and religion club at Drury, and in one of our meetings we talked about quiet quitting, and essentially the conversation was just about, you know, the ethics of work, and striving to be more and do more. Is that worth it? And how, like, say anecdotally, if my mom's been working at Waffle House for 20 years and's gotten nowhere, is that fair? Is it not? Should the mother be satisfied? Should she not be? And the conversation started going in that direction. And after that meeting, I talked with my professor a little bit about it. And my professor said something that's kind of stuck with me. And that is, you know, when you're doing this work, and the more work you do, the more perspective you have. And that's something that's just invaluable to assessing your contentment in life. And I think that's what this all boils down to, is, are you content? Because I think there are two kind of, I've talked about this with you before, there are two kind of opposite extremes here. You have discontent, which is where you feel like you need things that you don't have, and you want things that you don't have. And then there's a sort of complacency, where you don't want things
that you need, and you just kind of eliminate wanting. You eliminate desire, which I think is actually a very human thing, is to desire and to want, again, to have something to pursue. And so in the middle of those two extremes, there is content, where you have what you need and you're satisfied by that,
but you still have a desire to pursue more. And I think finding that medium is something extremely hard, and that can only be done through perspective. Aristotle writes in his Nicomachean Ethics that virtue is characterized by the mean between extremes.
Oh yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah. And so in this case,
and the Buddhists say something similar, which is fascinating.
Yeah, so the virtue of contentment lies between the extremes of being discontent and being complacent, where you still have desires, you still have goals that you want to meet, but you don't feel that you need to meet those goals to be happy. You're already happy with what you have now. And so for, again, the McDonald's worker who just plays video games all day, I would say that they are content because they know that they're getting rent paid, they got food, and they still, the fact that they're playing video games, they still want things. They still want goals to pursue.
So is it bad because I think that most people will acknowledge that it's like, if a person is happy and whatever they're doing, they're content in whatever they're doing, that's okay in a personal sense. But on a societal / worldwide level, if we were to just apply that philosophy universally, is it okay for people to have modest expectations for their contentment?
Is it okay? Yeah.
Like, is it like, because there's a big drive in our society right now and in our generation because of what we've seen growing up for people want to be influencers, and in my mind, that's almost a rather modest desire in life. It's a desire for popularity, essentially, which almost seems to counteract moderate. But it's an easier task to accomplish, and it's a simpler task to accomplish than becoming a biochemical engineer or becoming an astronaut. It's like it used to be the kids would say, I want to be this great thing that requires a lot of education, that requires a lot of work and effort. And now kids are saying, I want to be this thing that is cool but does not require a lot of effort. In your mind, is that a bad thing? Is it bad for people to set modest expectations for their contentment?
I would say no, simply because it feels like take the influencer example. If to kind of quote Syndrome from The Incredibles, if everyone is an influencer, then no one will be.
That is very
right?
true. Yeah, no one is an influencer.
And so what kind of happens is there's this natural sort of balance to these things where, if enough people want to pursue this sort of modest thing, that's fine. But if everyone's pursuing this modest life, as opposed to, say, a chemical engineer, well, then society is going to start kind of waning, right? Progress is going to stop being made. But since we always are going to have that kind of innate desire to pursue more, then if all of us are on this same plane, then we all are going to have this desire to go above that. And so kind of because of the human spirit, because of this kind of competitive nature that we all have to some degree, I think this sort of equilibrium that you're describing can't exist, because there are always going to be those people who want to be more and do more than what they're already doing.
Statistically, there will always be people who want to be biochemical engineers. So I guess it's less a question of whether or not this is going to be a real consequence, and it's more like a moral, ethical debate. Because I've been asking these questions, but I guess my point of view is, like I've said before, it's a little bit hypocritical in the sense I'm working on that, where I don't think it is a moral or ethical a bad thing for somebody to have modest expectations for their contentment, for them to be content in the little things in life, and I think that's something to aim for. But I look at myself, and I realize that I have been content recently in these small things in life and doing what I'm doing. And I think to myself, here's how I want to phrase it. I've had difficulty in identifying on whether I'm content or complacent, because I think the line between those two things is very fuzzy. And I do think that it is not morally evil, per se, to be complacent. I do think it will eventually lead to discontent. You know what I mean?
I think
if you don't realize you're complacent now, you'll be discontent later. Whereas you should always consciously be striving for a state of contentment.
So I asked myself the exact same question. Like, where is this line here where I'm like, okay, yeah, I recognize that I have what I need to be happy. And so I'll let myself be happy. But I'll also still want things. And I asked myself, okay, but am I veering too far towards complacency? And the conclusion I came to is the very fact that you're asking yourself that question.
It's very true, right? It's like the fact that you're asking yourself, yeah, I see what you mean.
It shows that you do have this drive to, keep pursuing things. And that places you into the content category.
I think it's very fuzzy in the sense that, we're taught that part of being a virtuous, morally good person is to be humble. And I think it has a really fascinating intersection with being an intellectual person, being a thinker, because oftentimes you'll come to these conclusions and be like, okay, yeah, gone down that rabbit hole. It's like, okay, I'm thinking about this, therefore I'm okay. But then you're like, or is that just arrogance? Is that just in of itself one of the most complacent things you could do to self-identify yourself as intelligent enough to recognize that you are not complacent? That's a rabbit hole, though.
Yeah, well, and something very interesting is you mentioned that it's virtuous to be humble. That used to not be the case. In the times of Greece, humility was seen as one of the extremes, whereas arrogance was another, and justified pride was the mean. But especially once Christianity started taking the world by storm, humility became virtuous. And that's still what I believe. I believe that being humble is very important.
Well, I think humility. So I actually think, and this is a discussion I've had in the past, but I think that humility actually has a separation from pride. I think that humility, maybe not as it's taught in the Bible, but certainly as I think the way it should manifest as a virtue, is not the absence of arrogance. It is not the absence of pride. It is more a lifestyle in of itself. Living humbly is a frame of mind. It's an understanding that the world is bigger than yourself. It is an understanding that you're a cog in the machine, understanding that even though times might be hard for you now, they're hard for others. It's more than just that. So I think, I'm not sure because I've never read the Bible, I've never been preached to it about it, but I'm fairly certain that's what they're talking about. Whereas I would agree that the total absence of any sort of pride can be a bad thing in of itself.
Yes. Because then you have no sense of self-worth at that point,
yeah.
Right? And I think it's the difference between acknowledging your self-worth and advertising your self-worth.
Very much so.
Because Jesus, he was literally like, "Hey guys, I'm the Son of God." Right? He knew what his value was, but he didn't use that as a crutch to climb up any kind of social ladder. He tried to use that fact about himself to better the lives of others, to the best of his potentially unlimited ability, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I love how you said humility isn't the absence of X or the absence of Y, because we're actually talking about in my Sunday school class peace, and how peace is not the absence of chaos. Peace is not the absence of strife or struggle.
It's not emptiness.
It's not. Peace is being, according to the Bible, peace is being filled with the Holy Spirit. Peace is having this overwhelming note. It overwhelms the bad. It doesn't make the bad go away, but it overpowers it. It is not a war being avoided. It is a war being won between you and your connection with God and the things of this earth that kind of weigh you down, right?
I think it's very fascinating to me that in a spiritual sense, all these different religions, whether you can argue their validity as from a theistic standpoint, I think they all oftentimes preach directives to the same thing. And I think a lot of them preach peace. And something I think very fascinating is Zen. And forgive me, I'm not the most taught on Zen, but what you're describing to me is Zen. Zen is reaching that state of oneness with everything around you. Right.
Well, and if you argue that God is what constitutes everything, then a stronger connection with God ties right into that, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, because I'm not a theist myself, but I do think I am spiritual in the sense that I believe in God. But that's a whole different conversation. But it's a little fuzzy. But I don't necessarily believe in the Christian God, but I do believe in God, I think. And I do think that there are plenty of people that have existed on this planet that have gotten really freaking close to seeing the face of God. And who have seen... Because there will be times where you meet people who are, I guess, more enlightened than you are. And you just kind of have you ever had that sense of peace from meeting somebody like that?
Yes.
You're just like, it's like, even if you don't get it, it's like, okay, somebody gets it. Somebody understands why we're here. So thank God. You know what I mean? It's just like that relief of being able to put that dread and that anxiety about living and about what it's about in somebody else's hands for a short while. And I do think there have been people like Jesus, whether or not, I'm not going to argue whether or not he was theistically the Son of God or not, but I think he certainly possessed that enough to inspire what is obviously the largest world religion right now.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a very interesting perspective because, I was thinking about this morning. When it comes to religion, I respect agnosticism a lot more than I do even some Christians, but and atheism, because I think agnosticism, you are willing to admit that there is stuff out there that we cannot know. Socrates is big on this. The only thing I know is that I know nothing. And a lot of atheists, when I discuss these things with them, they're like, well, no, eventually we're going to have everything explained, and religion will never need to enter into the equation. We'll never have to consider these false notions or illusions of metaphysical powers or anything spiritual. Eventually, everything is going to be boiled down to the material, and we'll end it there. And I don't know. I feel like that just kind of undermines a lot of the innate beauty in the universe, and a lot of the beautiful components of the human experience.
I think there's definitely an arrogance in that sort of statement. I was in astronomy recently, and we got to the point near the end where we were talking about the more esoteric concepts in astronomy. It moved away from the concrete and moved towards dark matter and dark energy. And the conversation basically boils down to, we don't fucking know what these things are, and they violate certain principles and certain theories, so we don't know. And I think the divine is not gone whenever you understand something. Like, I'm not sure if you've ever read the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, but even reading it from an agnostic point of view, from like that spiritualist point of view, not necessarily as a Christian, or even at the time, right, as a Hellenist, as a believer in Jupiter and Zeus and stuff, he talks a lot about the divine. And he talks about the divine in the sense, it almost makes you feel like a molecule in a greater organism. He talks a lot about how we are all made of the same stuff, about how the wind and the earth and the flames and the water, what they saw to be the elements at the time, constitute what makes the body, and now we know them as elements. And every time I read something like that, I was reminded that, one day we'll die, whether you decide to be cremated or buried or whatever it is. With enough time, your body will decay, and your cells will return to everything. And in a roundabout way, even if you don't believe in an immaterial soul, even if you want to be as atheist and scientific heart, like that's all you believe in, which I don't necessarily disagree with out of principle, but I do think if that's what you want to believe in, those cells that constituted your body will one day make up plants, they'll one day be consumed, they'll one day make eventually more life, whether sentient or not. And in my mind, that makes me believe in this notion that everything is a part of, I guess, what you would call God, what I would call just the fabric of, like, just the divine, in a sense. It's like, no matter what way you look at it, we are all part of the same thing. And one day, whenever the universe collapses again, we'll all be the same thing again.
Have you ever played a game called Everything?
Sounds familiar.
So it's on Steam. It's about $15, and I think his name was like Adam Watts, but you have it's narrated with like recordings of this philosopher named Adam Watts.
Oh, I've listened to Adam Watts before, though.
Okay, yeah,
I've listened to him on YouTube.
And so it's so fascinating because it sounds like this is exactly where you're going with this, where it's like us, we are just extensions of a greater whole, and that's, I think, very much in line with God. Because if God is the creator of everything, then God, as an artist puts himself into their pieces, God put himself into his creation. And he's the one that's kind of constituting it, as I said earlier. And so we are kind of extensions of the Holy Spirit in us with this physical matter.
There was a very impactful line. You find wisdom in the funniest of places. So got big into for like a few months there, and I still intermittently listen to Dimension 20 and other live action D&D podcasts. My favorite dungeon master in that space is Brennan Lee Mulligan. He actually, and you'll understand very soon how this came to be, but he actually graduated with a degree in philosophy, and you can really see it in his work. He's always trying to interject these interpretations of life and stuff. And so I forget how it came to pass, but a character got to talk to this like divine entity in game, like this like all-knowing divine entity got to ask any question it wanted to. And the player was like, I'm going to troll, what's the meaning of life? Obviously, looking at Brennan Lee Mulligan, like, answer that, right? Answer that for me right now. And Brennan Lee Mulligan said, you are the extension by which the universe shows its care. If you don't care, then the universe doesn't. But if you show that you do, it will as well. Which is beautiful. Like, absolutely beautiful. And ignoring where it came from, it really kind of showcases what I think you're saying. It's like, we can focus on the negativity, and I know a lot of people who just think humans are these rotten, evil, awful creatures. But at the end of the day, if you decide to yourself that you want to be the instrument by which the universe displays its cares for the people around you, then you can. And in that sense, you are demonstrating the good aspect of creation itself. You know?
And in loving others, you are loving yourself.
Yeah, 100%.
And that totally coincides with a lot of biblical scripture. And so I think it's just so fascinating how this stuff just kind of just permeates human.
Well,
the
it's the human condition.
Yeah,
it really is. I think one of the failures of theistic institutions, I will say, is not in because some of them do indoctrinate, but not in the sense that they indoctrinate, but they try and because like the goal is, especially from a raw theistic standpoint, baptize them, teach them to be the right way so they don't go to hell, don't get punished, whatever it is. But I think that whenever you try and teach a kid something young like that, oftentimes you push them away from ever truly understanding.
You do.
It's like, I used to identify myself as an atheist, not because I was like hardcore anti, because I was never raised religious, but I was just like, it didn't feel like there was anything that was brought to my attention that merited logically a belief. And it was until I was older that I discovered some of these ideas on my own that I started to come to be more spiritual, be more agnostic, and to kind of accept what you can't understand and stuff like that. But I think that theistic institutions fail people.
They often do.
And it's human nature. It's like no humans can be perfect, But it is unfortunate.
Well, and like you're kind of saying here, there needs to be room for you to develop your own understanding and connection with Scripture and with God.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think I've been blessed by my family because they gave me the room to do that. And so I was starting to sort of depart from Christianity around middle school because I started realizing, how little I really understood about it. But then, instead of giving up, I tried to pursue understanding it more and connecting with people who are, especially connecting with the older generations and trying to understand, what has their thought process about this stuff led them to. And in doing that, I've become a much stronger Christian than I ever was because I'm starting to kind of gain my own understanding of this stuff, a deep, meaningful understanding instead of the superficial, oh, this stuff is the way it is. And because it's like there are these abstract facts that are just sitting out there that you need to accept. Like 1 + 1 is 2, right? Okay, you can teach a kid that, but you can't teach a kid how that is meaningful to them. Because it's not. It's abstract and it's out there. So if you don't believe in God, you'll go to hell. That's an abstract fact that's just sitting out there in the mind of a kid.
And they're taught it as, more than abstract, they taught it as an objective truth. And I think what can happen, and because I think the major reason we have so many atheists in society, and once again, I don't necessarily think that's an inherently bad thing, but the reason there are a lot of atheists in society is not because atheism is so seductive. It's because oftentimes theism is just presented so fucking badly.
It's oftentimes repugnant.
It has a bad public image.
It does, but once you start inviting people into these circles, that totally changes. Because even some of my friends who are like not opposed to Christianity, they're just like they're not really in the loop. When I bring them to church, they'll be like, "This isn't what I expected.
Yeah,
I thought you guys would be a lot less chill than this, right?" But that's what comes. So when I was talking earlier, when I said abstract, it didn't necessarily mean something that's not concrete.
I do exactly know what you mean. I just wanted to elucidate.
Yeah, so
I'm not saying it wrong.
But yeah, something distinguished from the self in terms of meaning. But in recent years, it's the whole hell thing doesn't even need to enter the equation because your motive for pursuing Christianity shouldn't be wanting to avoid hell. Your motive for pursuing Christianity should be love.
And that
wanting to love yourself and love others more.
Unfortunately, that perspective, and of course institutions are people, but institutions are the ones that have propagated that idea. I think because if you really get into the nitty-gritty of reading the Bible and understanding translations and stuff, the whole brimstone and hellfire thing is
it's barely even there.
It's barely even there.
And oftentimes, like throughout history, I did a huge archive project on this in 8th grade. Hell is oftentimes not even depicted as a place so much as it is a condition in which you are separated from God. And this will actually tie into a discussion I want to have just in a few minutes. But I always find that so fascinating because God talks about he kind of embeds us with the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the thing that lives in your heart, right? And so you have God the Father, who's the big, powerful, macho man up in the clouds. Then you have Jesus the Son, who is kind of the gateway between us and him. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And so Jesus is the one who kind of takes the humans, takes the God and kind of like holds our hands to form a chain. And then the Holy Spirit is God in us. And so that's where the whole notion of the Trinity comes from. And my view that I've come to think about in recent years is when you go to hell, when you die, if you did not believe in God, if you do not accept him, it's essentially like not letting someone into your house, right? And so what God does is like, you don't want me? Okay, that's fine. I'll go away. And then so the Holy Spirit at that point leaves you. And whether that means you're just kind of a husk, or whether that means that you have this kind of soul that's lost its glow, lost its luster, I can't say. But what I believe in that notion is that, people always talk about, people who go to hell, they have to suffer forever. That's not fair. I'm like, well, can we even argue that people who wind up there are people as we know them? Because, I believe that as a Christian, I believe humans are identifiable by their close connection with God through the Holy Spirit. And so if we get to this point after death where God removes the Holy Spirit from us, can we even call that thing a person? It might have the memories of it. We don't know the nature of ourselves after death.
You saying that do you believe that in a sense God takes what makes a person away and then sends the rest to hell?
Yes,
essentially. I know obviously we don't believe in the fire and brimstone, but it's that act of separation that you believe.
Yeah. And so, how that, because again, the Bible doesn't describe too much of it because it's not something we need to know here on earth.
I think something that's really fascinating, and I think something that it is impossible to remove Christianity or any religion from the folk mythology that kind of sourced it and the cultures that preceded it, right? For example, the Bible was first written in the Old Testament was obviously Hebrew, and then that was translated to a myriad of different languages, Latin and Greek primarily. So I think one of the major reasons we have the notion we do of hell is because the Greeks and the Hellens, the people who believed in Jupiter and all that, all those myths. Well, Hellens, Hellenen, Hellenistic culture and stuff like that. And the Latins and the Romans, they believed in Tartarus. They believed in the underworld. They believed that hell was a physical place that you could literally walk to if you knew how to get there. Right? They believed there was literally the underworld.
He's punching it on Google Maps. Like,
No, exactly. It's like walking to Mordor, And I think whenever you look at it from that perspective and understanding where that historical notion came from, it's like whenever you're one of the first Christians, right, and you're pitching this religion to people, it's like most of the time people who accepted Christianity or accepted Christ, they actually weren't entirely converting to Christianity. They were adding Christ. It's like, okay, yeah, Christ is the Son of God, but all these other gods still exist. All these other ideas still exist. And so what you'd rather have is the idea of Christianity as it is now is definitely primarily the New Testament, Jesus' teachings and that sort of stuff. But it's impossible to escape from that folky basis as far as mythology goes. Did you know the primary basis for the way people view hell, the 8 circles and all that, was essentially a fan fiction?
Dante's Inferno, yeah.
Dante's Inferno.
Yeah. Well,
which is and I'm not sure if it was canonized or anything, right? It wasn't.
I don't think so, no.
No, yeah.
But something I find very interesting is, we talk about this a lot in church, how the Bible was kind of written in such a way that people could make sense of it. And as we've progressed with society and stuff, we don't need to. We can more easily think about more abstract concepts. But back then, hell, you can't describe it as a state of being removed from physical existence. So you have to say, okay, hell's just a place, right?
Yeah, that you go to through bed. It's a much easier thing to explain, especially if you have a parallel in Tartarus, in Hades, already that exists.
And so it needed to be written in such a way that both historical context such a way that would make sense for people with their historical context, and for people reading in the future to make sense for them with their future context as well. And that's really the role of the church, is to
derive the actual spiritual meaning from the Bible more so than the words itself.
Yeah, and that's why there are entire institutions dedicated to teaching people how to read the Bible.
Honestly, that's why the Catholic Church didn't allow people to read the Bible for a long time. Because was it wrong? Yes, but not unjustifiably so. They were probably they were primarily doing it for political reasons. That was their power.
And then Tyndale's like, "Screw you guys, stop."
Yeah, exactly. But regardless, it's they also. I bet there were people in the church, honest Catholics, who were like St. Thomas Aquinas, who were like, I just don't think people can get these concepts. And they probably weren't entirely wrong.
I would think they were mostly correct, yeah.
Because as I'm not like a pessimist. I don't believe humans are trash or anything like that. But I do think that in the past 200 years, we've done a lot of growing, and more people are more educated than they ever have been.
So I think this actually ties into a big problem with Christianity nowadays. And it's what we were talking about earlier. The problem that the Catholic Church was having is not that some of their intentions may have been bad, but some of them were also good.
There are plenty of good people who are like, I'm a Catholic, and they just wanted to do that well.
And I think the reason that trying to bar people from interpreting the Bible for themselves, reading it for themselves, the reason why that's so wrong is because it leaves no room for growth. It leaves no room for being wrong.
Yeah.
And then being corrected, because that's so much more impactful. If you take a child, if you let them scrape their knee and get hurt, they're much less likely to repeat that same mistake. And so if you have a young Christian who's growing up and doesn't really understand these concepts very well, if you let them try to explore them, if you let them wander off the path a little bit, that gives you the chance to redirect them towards the path. And then they, in their mind, will have a better idea of what that path looks like and what that path is. Well, if you never let them wander away, it's like you're holding your hands right in front of their eyes and just kind of shuffling them very slowly down the path.
Some at least something I remember I had a really bad day. I don't know where this bad day came from at the time. I think I had recently broken up with my first girlfriend. I was really depressed overall. Had these multiple bad episodes. I went to school one day. I had art foundations, and I was with the freshman beneath me. I was a sophomore. I had the freshman beneath me, probably a future classmates. And I was sitting there. I was fuming, and this girl next to me, she was rather nice. She's like, "Hey, what's wrong?" I'm like, "Where do we go when we die?" And I started this class-wide conversation about mostly Christianity, because I was just I was in a combative mood. I'm like, you can't know that shit like that. Very punkish of me. You never would have expected it. But the primary takeaway I remember getting from those conversations is that for most people who have been raised Christian their entire life, or any theistic doctrine their entire life, especially from a young age, there's not a lot of room for discussion, because you're not talking about concepts, or you're not talking about ideas. You're talking about like objective reality to them. It's like if I were to say, why do you believe in God? It's like asking them, oh, why? Like my parents told me that. That's like, why do I believe in the sun or the ground?
And the Bible,
and it's a really hard conversation.
The Bible tells you to not do that. The Bible says, if you're asked about your faith, the question about your faith, be ready to serve as a good witness to God and explain your faith.
I don't think it's their fault, because with the way in Christianity and other basically all theistic things are taught, it's because the way their parents taught them, so they teach their children, is this is the way it is, right? So if you ask if somebody were to ask me, and I wasn't educated on it, as to why gravity works, I wouldn't be able to give them a fucking detailed reasoning. I'd just be like,
it just does.
It literally, that's what it is.
Hey, watch me drop this. See, gravity.
Yeah, exactly. And while there are explanations, there are reasons behind the idea. Most people especially if God and theism is presented in that way, aren't going to be equipped.
Yeah.
To fucking have those conversations.
Exactly. And so the Bible, again, it speaks against that. And again, like you said, it's not necessarily the fault of the child in that case.
Or even any adult. Once you become an adult, if you've never been taught, how can you know?
Yeah, and so that's what the Bible kind of touches on, is lead people to be good shepherds, right? You can't just, constantly, like a shepherd, a shepherd isn't controlling exactly where the sheep go. The shepherd gives the sheep time to wander, time to go astray, but the good shepherd will always bring them back. And that's what I was talking about earlier, kind of with the whole path analogy. Being a good shepherd, you need to allow your sheep to wander. And nowadays the word sheep kind of has a negative connotation, but you know what I'm saying, right? Let your children wander, or your students wander, and be there to guide them back to where they need to be if they go too far. And that, in doing that, the children learn more about their faith and more about the way, not necessarily the way things are, but how they feel about these things. And so for a long time, I couldn't explain my faith at all, beyond, it's just my parents. And I'm still not that good at doing it now, but I have a much better idea of why I continue to pursue Christianity above other belief systems. Because I sometimes ask myself, I've been pursuing Christianity my whole life, but what's stopping me from trying to pursue Hinduism or Buddhism?
That's actually a question I thought of earlier, if you don't mind interrupting. Would you feel comfortable praying or engaging in rituals of other faiths?
Right now, yes.
That's good to hear. Because I would feel the same way. Because it's not like I don't feel like that's violating like your principles, you know, because I feel like part of me believes that every faith on the planet is praying to the same divine, the same God.
I've heard a lot of people believe that. Yeah.
It's just like they've seen different aspects, they've seen different beliefs, you know. So it's like in my mind, you could go to a mosque, pray towards Mecca, and you're still praying for your God. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But now I want to turn this conversation around a little bit. So we're talking about, this connection with God and whatnot, and being able to wander astray, and discover things for ourselves and learn these things. A question that's really been on my mind, well, really on both of our minds for a while now, is say you have this God, and say these people, some people wind up believing in him and get to go to heaven, and these other people go to hell. And maybe they have this Holy Spirit component removed and aren't even people anymore, so we don't necessarily need to be bothered by it, but these people go to hell, right? A question that naturally comes up is, okay, people go to hell, people go to heaven. What role do the people play in that? And then you could argue, well, okay, the people choose whether or not they want to believe in God. And they're like, okay, so people get to choose this. Well, what if they weren't raised Christian? And then the answer that the Bible says is, these people, they were not given the chance to believe in God. They weren't really shown him. They didn't reach the age of accountability. They were never consciously made aware of the conception of God, and so they get a get out of jail free card. Essentially, is how I have been taught. Maybe I'm completely wrong about that, but let's take that. And then after that, the people in this conversation will say, okay, so you choose whether or not you believe in God, but do you? How can you choose whether or not you believe in God if all that is based on your life's circumstances? And because what about someone who's born, and because of a causal sequence of events, even if God decides to intervene, that's him kind of choosing who goes to heaven and who goes to hell in that case, is it not? So do people even get to choose whether or not they believe in God? Or, since God knows everything, is God just sending some people to their doom from the onset? How is that fair? How can you say that God is a just God, is a good God, so on and so forth? And so now this has kind of turned into a discussion about free will, right? Because I think, and we have talked about this before, I think free will is one of the hardest things to talk about, especially when you throw theology into the equation. Because take materialists, for example, who believe everything in the universe is just comprised of atoms, molecules, quarks, leptons, whatever, right? And you have these particles doing their thing, and they all follow these laws. And if they all follow these laws, then everything in the universe is a causal sequence. It's what we call a causally closed universe. So all the inputs and the outputs are pretty much predetermined. And observably, experimentally, you might not be able to tell exactly what's going to happen when. But you could, if you knew all of the laws, and if you knew how everything started, then you could draw out and map out a causal sequence of the entire history of the universe, right? And so that's kind of what materialists would believe. And in that case, no, you don't have free will, because then you are just comprised of these materials obeying these material laws, and there's nothing you can do about it. So materialists do not believe in free will in that sense. Then you go on to Cartesian dualists who believe in some kind of mind substance, or maybe even non-Cartesian dualists, or maybe just people who believe in soul in some capacity, some kind of human conscious property that allows them to kind of break the material causal chain.
It is basically humans are special, so they can do it.
A humanistic view, yes, and so humans are special, so they can do it. But then that ties into, okay, what gives them this ability to do? Where does this ability arise? How is it that we are born, and then we just suddenly have this capacity to do these things and disobey these material laws? And then someone who's a theologian would say, oh, so this is from God. God gave us this ability. The Bible even says, we are made in God's image. So that's where our capacity comes from. But then if God knows everything, then when he creates us, he knows exactly what we're going to do based on where he puts us and the circumstances that surround our lives. So God willingly puts people on a life course that will end in them not believing in him and supposedly going to hell, because he knows everything. And so he's doing this, and he knows it. So what's the point? How can you say that we have free will if God knows everything and sets off a sequence of events where we will inevitably follow it, even if we don't know what it is?
I believe in three things that play into, I guess, my belief in how free will exists, because I do believe in free will. First, if God exists, because I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Hindu, I'm not a Muslim, but if God exists, if the divine exists, like I do genuinely believe there is some sort of divine, then if it is all-powerful, if it is all-knowing, it would be incomprehensible for any human to be able to comprehend. In that sense, God's will is unknowable to us. And in that sense, God can do anything and we wouldn't be able to explain it. In that sense, we don't have to explain why he would do these things. Second, I believe that some humans are more free than others. I don't believe free will is an on or off switch. I believe free will is informed by your level of knowledge, by your level of enlightenment, and I do believe that is dependent upon your circumstance somewhat, but it can also be dependent upon how much you've pursued it. I think most people, the majority of human beings, will go through most of their lives probably without a passing thought to free will because of the circumstances that they are put into. And in that sense, they are less free, having not thought of free will, than those that have, which I do believe is not an indictment of free will, but more in a consequence of their circumstances. I believe that the more you know, the more you understand, the more knowledge you have about the decisions you can make. And I think the proof of that lies in the sensation you get whenever you're 5 years down the line, you look back and thought to yourself, well, if I had known that, I would have decided differently. And the sensation that you feel whenever you do come across this tier of enlightenment that sometimes, like, you'll read something or you'll hear something and you're like, I've never thought about it that way before. And I think that no human can ever be all the way enlightened unless they have some aspect of the divine. And I think that evidence of people believing that is evident in basically every religion. The Prophet Muhammad was not the son of God, but he was divine because he saw what was right. Christ was the son of God, literally, in the Christian aspect. Buddha was a person who had become so knowing, so knowledgeable about the way of life, he achieved nirvana and left. Like, you see that everywhere. Free will comes whenever you become enlightened. And I think, third, part of me believes in, I'm not sure if I believe in this immaterial soul, at least it's the way it's classically depicted, like a ghost that inhabits your body. But I certainly do believe in the human spirit. I do believe that there is something special about human beings. And I don't think that's necessarily evident in some sort of mythical, magical, or supernatural sense. But I do think it's evident as far as empirical evidence is concerned. Human beings do things that other creatures do not. And whether that we are here by divine providence or by happenstance, it is still evident that those things happen. It is still evident that we break the rules and the norms. I do think that there are other entities out there in the universe that probably possess these same qualities as us. So I don't believe necessarily that humans are special because God placed us here intentionally just by ourselves. But I do think that if God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and forever living, that part of his essence may be coalesced into enough of a form to take the form of sentient beings. And I guess that's how, as far as I've gotten on it.
So I loved your first point, because what I was going to get into is my resolution to this is free will is almost sort of derived from ignorance of the outcome of your actions.
Yeah.
Well, and then you have to ask, does God have free will? And this actually, I'll save that for later. Put a pin in that. But as for us, I think what gives us the ability to act freely is to again not know the outcome of those actions. If we did, then we couldn't say that we're acting freely, because we're obviously just going to do the thing that has the best outcome, right? And if we didn't do that, we would not be able to have a desire to not do that. At least. Are you saying
like if we were like, it's like saying that computers don't have free will because they do what is the best action no matter what the best action is, whatever they can.
Well, sort of. What I'm saying is like, if we knew all the facts of life, then we would know exactly all the decisions. We would know why we made all the decisions.
We wouldn't make mistakes.
Until now. We wouldn't make mistakes, exactly. And we would know how everything's going to play out as well. And so in knowing that, we would just kind of have to trudge along that path, knowing how it's going to end. I compare it to the character Sapphire from Steven Universe. She was like, yeah, I know how my life's going to end, but that's cool. But we are not like that. We do not know what the future holds. So anytime we make a decision, our ignorance of the outcome is what makes that decision so impactful and meaningful. And, for other beings, and I think one of the things that, again, you were saying that really separates humans from those beings is we meditate on decisions. Other creatures do not. They are, at least from what we can tell, they are much more heavily based on a stimulus response pattern, like akin to behaviorism. And so, like I say, take my dog for example. I might walk through the door and my dog will be jumping all over me and excited to see me. That's something that has been sort of hardwired into dogs to do because they want to show this sort of affection. So there's a pack identity, and so that everyone who's in the pack knows who everyone else in the pack is. And once that pack identity has been established, all those dogs become stronger because that pack can work together to accomplish things. That's also why dogs like sleeping with other people, with their owners. They usually don't like sleeping all on their own because if they're not around their pack, they're kind of in a dangerous place. That's why a lot of dogs have a lot of separation anxiety too. And so with these non-human creatures, you can see, and for some of them it's harder. Like take ravens or crows or dolphins or these more intelligent creatures that we see. Even if they have more complex patterns, we see no evidence of them meditating on their decisions. You have the stimulus that they're being given, and then they go for what their genetics and what their physiology tells them to do based on that. Whereas with humans, you cannot make the same argument without... We actually talked about this in my philosophy class today. You can't make the same argument for humans because of desire, because of purpose. These notions that inevitably affect our decisions when it doesn't seem to affect the decisions of other kinds of creatures. And that's really what makes anything that we do so impactful. Humans, as Descartes would say, are special in the sense that they are aware of their awareness.
Yeah, we can see our thoughts.
Yeah, we are capable of metacognition.
Are other creatures capable of thought? Possibly, at least that we know of. Are they capable of looking back upon their thought patterns consciously? We don't know. Probably not.
Probably not, yeah. We have no evidence that they can. And so that's something that's really been striking me in these philosophy classes. Because, we just started the semester and we're already getting hands deep in some of these things. And the more I read about them, the more sort of humanist I become, in the sense that humans are Christians, I think, are naturally humanists. They believe that humans, even if there are other creatures out there.
Your response to evolution, then?
My response to evolution is that, frankly, is wrong. I do not believe that evolution has occurred. There's been a lot of stuff that's been unearthed about evolution, pointing to certain artifacts and skeletons, fossils, stuff like this. And I see that, and obviously I can't explain. I can't just say, "Oh, that's wrong." Doesn't make sense. And I've tried to give a lot of thought to evolution. Like, where does that come in play here? And my belief is that there is some missing piece out there that there's literally, instead of, an evolutionist would say, oh, we need to find the missing link. I believe that there is a missing gap, a missing break in this chain that we keep seeing. Because while other creatures, I definitely think they can adapt and they can evolve through a sort of natural selection sort of sense. We've actually seen that in a very short amount of time, creatures can develop new traits or properties that help them survive better in their environment. So I definitely believe that's possible. But when it comes to like long form, evolution, with humans gradually becoming more and more conscious of their decisions, that doesn't make any sense, because I don't think, because we also talked about this in my philosophy class, we have to ask ourselves, well, where's the dividing line for intelligence? Where does something go from being just kind of this autonomous process to being intelligent? And then there's also another dividing line. Where does something go from intelligent to like sentient? And then where does something go from, say, sentient to human, right? And we talk about artificial intelligence a lot. And what they're doing is mimicking human behavior because that's what we have told them to do. And that's just it. They're mimicking it. I don't think AI... Well, AI, even if we make it mimic humans perfectly, I don't think it'll ever be conscious. And even if it were, we couldn't know it was conscious. Because that's the thing about consciousness. It's a private experience.
You also can't... On that point, I do remember discussing this in my philosophy class. It's been a while. It's been like a year. You also really can't prove, at least perfectly that other humans are sentient.
Yeah, no, you can't.
And
My book uses the term philosophical zombies.
yeah, I've heard that before as well. But I think whenever it comes to evolution, I believe in evolution because I believe in Occam's razor more often than not, and I think that compared to, so it's like if you're a creationist. Creationism was a idea of explaining the world that stemmed from civilizations thousands of years ago. And while I don't necessarily believe that humans will understand everything, or that that's the design goal, or that there is no divine, I do believe that humans are always going to have a flawed perspective on what they can understand. You know, case in point, like medical history, case in point, psychological history. So to me, if you have this all-knowing, all-powerful God, maybe he did create everything. But why did he have to create things 60,000 years ago? Or however long ago the Bible said? If God exists, he could have made the Big Bang because he exists outside of any logical or structured like system of thought possible. And if he's all-knowing, he could have made the Big Bang knowing that we would have gotten here one day through evolution.
Yeah, and
Right?
that is a perspective I've considered. And I'm like, if I were to accept evolution, it would be on a theological basis. It'd be evolution was part of God's plan.
And I think that it's not hard to see it that way because I think the inherent struggle that creationists have of evolution is mostly the contradictions in the scripture. But as long as you accept that the scripture, like you said, is not the word of God, but rather the interpretation of the word of God the best way people can understand it, then I think that it's easy to, like, should you derive meaning and value from the Bible, the Quran, or whatever it is you believe in? Yes. But believing it to the point of falsehood is actually, in a way, a false idol. Because a human was the one who wrote the Bible.
Yes.
You know, in a way.
Or multiple humans, but yeah.
Yeah, over the course of hundreds of years. Although I will say, it's really interesting that I say that. It's like God may have said this in motion, because it does actually call into question free will. If he planned this out to get to this today, does that mean everything doesn't have that? I think whether or not we have free will, to get to the root of the discussion once again, because we keep diving into theism, I think we'll never know.
I don't think we need to know either.
I agree with you. I don't think we need to know. Because maybe everything is prearranged.
What if we can't see the bigger picture, then why worry about it?
And it's certainly not an excuse for evil behavior.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that we brought up in my intro to philosophy class last semester. It's like, well, how can we subject criminals? How can we persecute criminals and be like, hey, not prosecute criminals and be like, hey, you killed this guy, but we're gonna let you go because all the events in your life led you to do that, and there's no way you could escape it.
You can derive empathy from that, but I believe in free will insofar as I want to believe in free will, and maybe that's ignorant.
I would say no. I think, if anything, I think that's inspired, because believing in free will is believing that you have agency over your condition. Even if the source of that agency isn't yours to control, you've been given that.
Yeah, you've been given, yeah.
Right? And so it doesn't matter if you have all these things in your life that are leading you to do specific things in the future. You can't see that bigger picture at all. You can't even begin to comprehend that because there are too many variables that go into every decision you make.
And I think
which is so exciting.
Yeah.
It's so exciting.
Because, maybe everything is preordained, but something I love about history and the study of history is, even though it's honestly, if you really think about it, a surface level, because you could never truly know everything about what every human being has done, and even though history is usually a surface level exploration of what the big things were, history is evidence of complicated circles spawning complicated circles spawning complicated circles of human action and interaction. And in that sense, it's forever growing and forever deep in any direction you want to go. And it's scary, but I agree with you in the sense that I think that's also inspiring. Because one of my favorite tropes in literature and storytelling is the sword-bearing hero against all odds, blood, grit, and dirt dripping down everything. It's like, I'm going to fight anyway. Because I feel like it epitomizes the human spirit, because no one would blame a person in an impossible situation for giving up. But the evidence that is there of human beings in impossible situations not giving up is too much there for me to believe otherwise. And my favorite example of that, in the Holocaust, there was a Red Cross nurse. Because the Germans actually cooperated with the Red Cross to play lip service to the fact they weren't killing 6 million people. right? They actually like, hey, come inspect the camp, and they would like
give you a nice tour, take
exactly,
some pictures.
and they would like stage it all and stuff like that. But there's this one camp where like I think it was in Denmark as one of the reasons it was allowed to happen. This nurse was allowed to go in and treat certain people and leave. I think she was treating soldiers. She would have her toolbox of all of her medical tools with her. She would take babies in her toolbox and then smuggle them out of the camp. There was one day where she was found out, got the shit beat out of her, went home, came back the next day to do it again. To save more children. Against everything that... She would not have been blamed for preserving her own life, but she didn't. And I think that's proof of free will. In a way. In a very anecdotal, not logical...
No, but no, that's beautiful, though. Because it really... Again, talking about like human spirit, I think a huge component of that... Free will doesn't need to be... You can just avoid cause and effect. You can create your own causal chains. You can, just supersede everything around you. It doesn't have to be that.
Mm-hmm.
Free will is merely being able to act how you want to act, regardless of the source of those desires, regardless of the circumstances, and regardless of the inevitable outcome. And I think, in that sense, God is almost cursed, because and that's why he had to send his son to earth in a way to experience things in a human way, because God knows everything about everything, and that leads me. This is the pin I'm going to pull out now. Like, I can't imagine how God would want to do things. I can't comprehend how an all-knowing thing could have desires if they know the outcome of anything they could possibly do already. But I think part of that is God, as we kind of discussed, kind of constitutes everything. So when we are showing love to God, God is loving himself. And it's that's beautiful. God is essentially, from my perspective anyway, knowing the outcome of everything, he is doing it, and he's still finding joy and satisfaction in that. Much like if I'm going to play my favorite game, and I know every corner of this game, and I know everything that could possibly happen while I'm going through it, or if I'm watching my favorite movie, if I know every beat of the story already, I still love to see it unfold because I feel connected to it in some way. Even if I know I don't really have agency in exactly what happens in that story, just being an audience, especially if you're an audience to something that you made, is so infinitely wonderful. And that's really why I love game development, right? Throw that in. But it's so incredible how much of the joy that I experience in life I can see when I look in the Bible. Right? Because that's really what God is. God isn't just the joy, like God is life, according to Christianity. And so whenever I am happy, and whenever I am feeling this overwhelming joy, God is sharing that joy. And that is what, for lack of a better word, motivates God, is just having the pleasure of being an audience to behind the grandest stage. Even if he's the one who's also controlling what's going on, he gets to constantly witness himself and witness these things that he has made out of himself. And the fact that we can do that in our own human experience, even with our limitations, I think is what helps me not necessarily understand God's joy from this and understand, why God does things. But what it does do is it gives me a reason to appreciate why God does things. Yeah. And that he does things at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
powerful stuff.
Literally omnipotent.
Yeah, literally all-knowing, all-powerful stuff.
All-knowing, all-powerful stuff. Let's see. We're already over an hour.
Really?
Yeah, 69 minutes.
Nice.
So,
nice. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up.
Let's wrap it up. Let's talk a little bit about our week. So we talked about it in person, but
snow days.
Snow days.
Snow days. Yes. I forget what I was talking this about, but there's nothing like having a bunch. I think I just said this to you actually, but there's nothing like having a bunch of time to do exactly what you want to do to make you realize you hate doing that thing.
Yes, you say that.
So I think I put it more verbose right then. It's like not that you hate it forever, but it's like you spend all day every day, whenever you're at work, whenever you're at school, because you're kind of taught that those things are what you're supposed to do, and then that gives you. I think it's a really okay. We're supposed to talk about our weeks. I'll leave the philosophy for next time, but yeah, snow days, school, work, slowly getting into substitute teaching, like getting that ball rolling, working with bureaucracy, getting a credit card.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, getting a credit card.
There you go.
It's with my bank, but I need to start building my credit because I have no credit.
Well, yeah, that's why I started taking out loans on my car instead of just buying it lump sum, because I could have done that. But we have a friend, Chuck Layton, who works here in town, and we were talking with him, and he's like, "Hey, when you get a new car, even if it's not with our dealership, when you get a new car, make sure that you take out a loan on it, and make sure it's reasonable, make sure you can pay it off. But if you do that, you're gonna have a much easier time like getting an apartment and renting
100%.
taking out other loans." So I mean, I'm really glad he did that because that's what I'm doing with my car right now, building up a credit history. And
it kind of sucks. It's the game you have to play.
It is.
Because
it does.
because so the whole credit system. I watched a video on it. Ordinary Things. If he does like these video essays, I would highly recommend it. But the credit system is literally designed like to make you get into debt you can't pay, so you're forever paying off debt, right? Like they have. I'm not sure if this is like. I think he said this is like how in the industry they actually view it, but they have the spectrum. They have on one side the people who are called suckers, who use a credit card and get into debt mostly as a convenience to build a credit score, or a convenience just in general, just to have the credit card, just to have the debt, just to have the credit score. They pay their debt off monthly because they have the income. Credit card company hates them because they keep their interest rate low. They hate them because they make no money. Over here are the people that get so much fucking debt they go bankrupt, and then they're worthless too, because if you go bankrupt, then all your debt's wiped away, and what can you do? And then you have in the middle, right where they want you. They want you in enough debt that the interest rates are high, that you can't ever pay it off fully. But they don't want you to pay, they don't want you to actually always pay it off. They want to have you in their pocket forever.
Yeah.
And it's like, but you have to play, as a young person, like, you just got to play into the system.
You have to. And it really does stink. Yeah. And I'm just sad. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
No.
You're welcome.
Let's see. What I've been doing this week, not much. Yeah, we had those not even snow days, just ice days, which are worse because
they are worse. That is very true.
Yeah, because you feel like you should be able to go out and do things, but you can't. And
well,
there's nothing to play in.
My cul-de-sac was a sheet. It was like I couldn't see where it began in the sidewalk, and you know what I mean. It was just a sheet of ice.
My neighborhood was the same way. I was like, okay, where's my driveway end and start? And no, it was bad. It was bad, but now at least most of it's melting away. I'm also looking forward to my birthday coming up in 2 weeks.
Are you gonna be like 17?
Yeah. So I'll be 19, which is kind of a sad age because you don't have the satisfaction of being, oh, I am 20 now, new first digit of my age, yay! And then also you don't get like some of the new like responsibilities and new privileges of being 18.
It's also like I've kind of been getting over it, but like there is a societal, because like our society venerates youth. So it's like, oh, I'm no longer in my teens. My life is over. Like I've heard a lot of people make that joke. And it gets worse when you're 30 and then 40 and so on. But I think 19 is actually a pretty good age.
Well, when I'm thinking about like me as a person, I do think because ages are at the end of the day arbitrary, to some extent.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
It's like, how many times have you survived going around the sun? Started at this point, ending at this point. It is arbitrary.
So being 19, I do think is a great time in life, just because you have a great balance of freedom and independence. But like, if you need to fall back on your parents, you still can. That's still like acceptable at our age. And being so young, you still have a lot of room to explore. And like by the time you're 40. You're probably going to be locked into a career path. Maybe not.
Well, you're never stuck. No matter where you're at, you can make changes, positive changes, but it does get harder.
It does get harder.
Now, it's not harder because of your arbitrary age number, but usually as you get older, you make commitments, whether they're children, or a mortgage, or a wife.
Yeah.
And the commitments aren't bad. They're not inherently bad, but it does make it to where it's like you can't just go about face, right?
That's true.
It's like we're at the age right now where we have very low commitment. Our one commitment, like most people would say, is get through college.
Yes.
Right. That's it. Do that.
And maybe a relationship.
Maybe a relationship, and not to be not. It's not like you shouldn't be not serious about it, but it's more so in the sense that societally you're not expected to have. You're not expected to be married anymore.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
You're not, and it's like even if you don't intend to conform to society, you do still feel the societal pressures, right? So it's like, oh, I need to have my kid now. Like all my friends are having kids, but it's like right now we're free in the sense that you can have a relationship that may last the rest of your life, but you're not expected for it to last the rest of your life.
That's a good distinction to make.
It's not like you're gonna get. It's like, it's not like whenever you're 40 and you decide you don't like the person you're with anymore, and you have to get what I mean.
Yeah.
But we're free in the sense that we're societally free. But I always like to specify that you're never not free to make changes.
That is true.
Especially if it's better for you.
Yeah, and that's something I've been grappling with recently. Because ever since I kind of realized the clock was ticking on high school graduation, I was like, wait, hold on. Say I decide not to go to college after high school. I can always decide to go back.
For some reason,
and do
I
it
thought you were going to say
eventually.
drop out of high school, but I don't know why. No. I don't know why I thought that. Like,
so if I decide to not go to college, I could always do that later. And it might be a little bit harder. But like, there's someone in my computer science classes who's, I don't want to be rude, but they look like they're at least 40, if not older. And I'm like, at first,
why is that rude, right?
Yeah.
It's like what we're talking about. Like, why does our society venerate youth so much?
Good point. Good point. Wow.
Yeah, it's if anything, it should be. It's like, let's go, dude. You're going to college.
But that's exactly what I was thinking when I saw him. Because at first I was like, oh, he's older. That's actually really cool,
Yeah.
and so I think it's very admirable. I think it's more admirable to see people like that in college than us.
Well, yeah, because for us it's like expected.
Yes.
It's like, it's not like you have to go to college, but if you can, you should. It's kind of like the mentality.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I think especially someone who's older, seeing them in college, you're seeing that they are not being complacent. You see that they are willing to see themselves improving.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that takes a certain degree of humility, like we were talking about earlier. And so, how it came all full circle, that's neat. But I do think it's very important to have that reminder that you can always improve, no matter what that looks like. Because college is a very kind of streamlined improvement package.
Yeah, it is.
Right. But there's so many more ways to do it. I think nowadays people are starting to focus a lot more on those than they did in the past.
And honestly, because like the internet has, I'm not gonna say made college obsolete, because college isn't obsolete yet. I think it's still valuable to go, especially even outside of just getting the degree.
Yeah, no, especially just being there with the people and collaborating with them and making the connections, and just having an easy kind of annex to branch out and get those connections is very convenient and very helpful.
But like, I do think that in the future, like a physical brick and mortar college will be obsolete. And I think that because we're going digital more so than ever, but also because, like you said, access to self-improvement is easier than it ever has been. It's like it used to be that, like, if you were a medieval peasant and you wanted to read, it's like, sucks. Nowadays, if you want to learn a foreign language, you can go online and do it for free. Right? Like, you can find avenues to do it for free. And not like prior conversation, just because you can doesn't mean you have to. But the fact that it's there, I do think we're going to see a more decentralized method of getting the skills necessary for... Because I do think something that's really stupid. Because, like, do I like college? Yes. Is college a scam? Also, yes. You know what I mean?
I'm in the same camp.
You know what I mean? It's like, I love that I'm going. I'm really enjoying it. I think it's a valuable experience. But, like, why do I need to take freaking... If I'm learning to be a teacher... and I'm learning to be a history teacher, why do I need to take college algebra? Is there value to taking the class? Yeah, of course there is. But do you need it? No. Right?
Yeah.
And if you made me take it and you didn't make me pay so much money, yeah, dude, I'll take that class. I'm happy to. But the fact that, like, a lot of people are going in debt, like, in the tens of thousands to take unnecessary classes, now that's bullshit.
That is. That really is.
You know what I mean?
Well, and that's where they kind of get a gotcha, though, because we're saying, oh, well, is it really expensive? Yes, but I'm still going, so clearly I still think it's worth it.
Well, like, even like in a macro statistical sense, like, college graduates out-earn non-college graduates.
Yeah. And that's why a lot of us think it's worth it. And colleges know that, so they capitalize on it. And they're like, okay, we know that you think this is worth it, so we're going to charge you a lot of money to do this. Because you can go pretty high before you get to that threshold where people either don't think it's worth it anymore or simply can't afford it. And to that I say, thank goodness for the people who are modest and who work at McDonald's. Thank you for kind of keeping the lowest common denominator in terms of what they can afford where it is. That way we can save a bit more money, because if like everyone made hundreds of thousands of dollars, then colleges would always charge hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I do think it's like, does everyone need to make $100,000? No, because I actually remember I made that point you made in a debate one time, because like there was this one I was running a negative or doing an education case, and the affirmative case was essentially, hey, everyone should be the CEOs, everyone should be this. We're going to put them on a pipeline to get there. And the card we brought up was like, literally, society won't function without people cleaning the hallways and flipping burgers.
Yeah.
Now, do people need to, like, should people be able to live doing that? Yes. And, like, unfortunately, like, what people define as living is a little fuzzy. But should people be able to live doing that? Absolutely. But is it necessary that it happens? Yes, until we get robots to automate all of it.
Yeah.
Which probably is in the future, I will say.
Yeah. Well, and again, the nice thing about that is that, colleges have to take that into account when they're charging their tuition, because they're like, well, we want to find the balance between people actually coming to our school and being able to afford coming to our school, but also getting lots of money. And so this sort of checks and balances plays out, where do they charge a lot? Yes.
Remember the sucker spectrum? It's the same for college. It really is.
Yeah.
It totally is. Because you have the really poor people on one end who get massive government assistance. Like MSU, like they advertise on their website for tuition that high need students on average pay like really, really low, right? They put 0 on there. I'm not sure how true that is. And then you have your really high students who like you could afford to pay the sticker price and they're fine, But then you have those kids in the middle. They can afford to take loans, right?
Yeah.
And pay interest off for a very long time.
Yes.
It's fun.
Fun.
Fun, debt. Debt, fun. Done, fun, debt.
This is a very good conversation, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
100%.
I feel like we're going to be saying that about all of our conversations.
No.
But...
I'm just joking.
I'm
Goodbye. This is now the Loudest podcast with John.
I'm not even going to come back for my stuff.
You're in frame. You're in frame, by the way. Whenever you leave.
No, I'm not.
You know what? That's how we're going to end this one. That has been the Loudest Crow. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.